today. And when we did our practice session with Stacy and Rosario on Tuesday, Stacy said something that really caught my attention. You know, in this course, talking about revisioning reference, we've had a couple of guest presenters who've Marie Radford and Joe Janes and Lori Bell specifically, who have encouraged us to think about reference, to think about information service at the point of need. And Stacy said on Tuesday, it's all about catching someone at the moment of curiosity. Wow, that really stuck with me, that catching someone at the moment of curiosity, that's even a more proactive approach than providing reference at point of need. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rosario, who will tell us about the statewide California Information Services project. Rosario, welcome.
Thank you, Mary. And Stacy will be joining us. I just got a text message from her saying that she had the wrong login information or something, so I just emailed it to her. Thank goodness for modern technology and all this. Let me talk about how we have been approaching the whole, what some people are calling reference redesign here in California. And this came up because in California, those of you who are attending today from California, you know that California helps to support what's called second-level reference. But the number of questions coming into second-level reference has been declining over the last 10 years. It seems to have reached a bottom as far as it's not declining anymore, but neither is it really increasing. So as part of the whole concept of, so what do we do? How do we keep these numbers from going any lower? And how do we ensure that the user community, the regular Joe Blow Californian out there, knows that they can ask questions, go to their library or somehow ask questions of their library community? How do we make them aware of that? So back, oh gosh, it seems like such a long time ago, but back in December of 2007 through March of 2008, we actually worked with a polling firm, Zogby, and some of you may be familiar with them because they do a lot of polling. And this was just when the presidential election was getting going, so we were kind of trying to get them to do our stuff in between primaries, et cetera. They did 2 polls for us. That was stage 1. The first one was done with 706 participants here in the state of California, and we basically wanted to know, how do you find information? Not how do you use libraries, but how do you find and how do you use information? So that was 706 people, and that was a pre-selected group of people who have agreed ahead of time to work with Zogby. Once we had that information, we then asked Zogby to turn around and put together that poll, expand it a little bit so that we could then put it out to all of our libraries that wanted to put a link to the poll on their website. That poll was done in March of 2008. We had 1,926 participants, and interestingly enough, the findings are very, very similar. What we found was that most people start out their information searching activity by going to, using a search engine. Google was what they identified as the most often used, but there were others also. We asked them also, when you visit your library, what is it that you are looking for? They look for do-it-yourself information. They look for health medical information. In some cases, they're looking for government information, or a lot of them are looking for information pertaining to a school or training assignment. And, of course, genealogy was in the top 4 for the people who filled out the survey through the library links. Now, what's interesting is we also asked them, what kinds of resources do you use when you do visit your library? Books. They turn to the library when they need books, when they need general reference information, or when they're looking for a newspaper or journal article. We also asked them if they think their library does a good job of keeping up with technology. And for those who completed the survey from the library link, the overwhelming majority, something like 77%, said that they strongly agree or somewhat agree. For those who filled out the survey, the original survey where Zogby contacted them by phone, remember those weren't, we don't know if those people are library users, but 63% of those said that they were not sure if they're library, so they don't really know what the library is doing in terms of technology. And for us, what they told us was that if it's not a library user coming in, then they're really not going to know about what the library is doing in terms of technology. So we took that information and we moved on to stage 2, because what we wanted to do was pull together a group of people to help us plan a think tank. We met with a group that we called the Think Tank Creators. We met with futurists. We contracted with 2 futurists to basically help us look at the information and plan out, 10, 15, 20 years from now, what is it that library services should be looking like. The actual think tank took place in August of 2008, and if there's any of you out there who participated, you know that it was an intensive 2 days. We asked people to do a lot of conceptualizing, thinking about library services. Notice that we're not saying think about reference or how reference services are going to be evolving, but we asked them to just think about library services and what they're going to look like by the year 2020. And then there was a lot of feedback that we got from that. We had, you wouldn't believe how many flip chart sheets we filled up that were eventually shipped back to the state library. All of that was pulled together, and then we went and did some, asked for statewide input. We did presentations at CLA. We did a webinar. We asked people to let us know these are the things that came up at the think tank. So what do you think we should be concentrating on as far as trying to develop new services? And then in March of 2009, after about 6 months of feedback receipt, we put another group together that we called the Builders Group. And that group was brought in for a one-day session in which we said, these are the top vote getters. Which of the top vote getters do you think we should move ahead with? And how do you envision us doing this? What kinds of projects would we take on to make this a viable service or to make this a viable trial? So our next step, we really have gone all the way through the 5 stages that we had originally identified. So the next step is to actually make it happen. And believe it or not, we are planning to actually make it happen. Although we've been it's kind of slowed down, but it's slowed down mainly because of the situation at the state library with furlough days and an acting state librarian. So what we are looking at here is not necessarily a reinvention or a revisioning of reference, but rather an evolution of information services, an evolution of how we provide information. And I think that Stacy had it right on the button when she said we have to catch them at that moment of curiosity. We have to catch them at the moment that they think, oh, I wonder, or oh, I need this piece of information, or I wonder how that happens. And we say evolution because we really normally have been happy to wait for people to come to us, but I think that we really need to be more in your face as far as delivering that information, catching them at the moment that they say, I wonder what, or I wonder if. So this is a letter. Salinas Public Library, a couple of weeks ago, I believe, celebrated their 100th birthday, I believe. And as part of that, they asked young adults, teenagers in the community, to basically write letters to the future, that have been put in a time capsule that's going to be open in 2109. And this is one of them. And Stacy and I were going over some of the letters that she got copies of because we were just flabbergasted by some of the visions that these teenagers have. And I keep thinking 2109, okay, that's 100 years from now, but some of them, it's going to be their grandchildren who are living this future that they are envisioning. So this kid, Marcos, a 16-year-old, says, I think that the library 100 years from now will be a technological amazement. Outwardly may appear the same, but inside will be revolutionary compared to today. There will be a few preserved books as tributes to history. And I like this. Actual books will be held on computer consoles where you check out an empty cover, insert it into a console, and it can download any book you want. You then would be seeing a hologram of the pages. These are all very interesting. The librarian is going to be a hologram, a holographic person that can answer any questions you have. So there doesn't even have to be a body there. It can actually be a hologram of somebody who maybe is somewhere else. So this is one view of the future. So finding information, this is basically a time slide of how information has been found over the years, and you can see that we add more and more and more to it. And Stacy, if you want to talk at any time, just let me know.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm on the East Coast today. Yeah, this whole slide on finding information is just thinking about the different channels of information that we have access to today, and thinking about how many more channels that we have access to. And then if you look at the number of channels that are actually collapsing because the Internet is providing access to TV, radio, and a lot of these other things. So there's a collapse, but at the same time there's an expansion of the number of ways that people can get information.
So let's talk about, I'll let Stacy talk about one of her information finding experiences.
Yeah, so one of the things I've been thinking about is looking at where we've been and how we find information and how we find information today. And about a year ago, my cat Fred, that you can see there on the slide, produced an alien life form on our table. And completely flipped out my husband. Of course, I was kind of curious, and I looked at it and I thought, ooh, what is this? So what is it that most of you think I did? And I would love to see you just type something in chat. What do you think is the first thing I did to find out more information about this alien life form? And I see there's what's interesting to me about the holograph? The holograph thing, that it could actually be a person. Okay, so I observed it directly, yes. Looked at parasites online, Googled. Yes, absolutely. The next thing that I did was I searched Google. And because I'm a librarian, I use really difficult terms. I used cat and worms and came up with several different websites and clicked on one of the websites and then actually found one that had photographs that I could compare to what was turned out to be a roundworm. I did kind of touch it, but only with a Kleenex, I can see Linda mentioned. So I found out what it was. And so once I knew what it was, we needed to find a vet for our cat. So what do you think is the next thing I did? Of course, I Googled. And I Googled cats and a vet in Sacramento. And it came up with a list of all the vets, and I could see on a map who was closest to us. And then I actually clicked on the one that was closest to us and went to their website. Now, the only thing I couldn't do was actually make an appointment online, but gave me a phone number and called the vet, and I knew exactly what I had and what I needed to do. If we were thinking about this same search 20 years ago, what would have somebody have done 20 years ago? And I'd love to see anybody sort of add things to it, the chat line. So 20 years ago, take it to the vet. Yep, first. Call the vet first. I might have just talked to the neighbor. I might have looked it up in my home edition of Parasites. But it would have been, and then in order to find a vet, I would have, I might have called a librarian. Not sure. Some people do that. But in most cases, I would have had to find a vet. I may have looked in a phone book. After looking in the phone book, I would have then probably used a map or called for directions. And just within minutes, I was able to easily navigate through all the information that before would have taken so many more, taken a lot more effort. And again, I could have done all of this on my iPhone too. So it is very different in terms of how we have access to information and where we go. And I'm not sure that libraries have always or ever been the first thought for information. But there is a change and a shift in what we think about and how we find that information. And Rosario, you have another great example too.
Yes, my example involves pesky little ants. We're in a townhome here living in Pasadena. And one day I noticed, my husband said, oh, you're not going to like this. I came back from a trip, and he said, you're not going to like this. We seem to have ants. And I'm like, we seem to have ants? We either do or do not have ants. And sure enough, and I said, kill them all. Get out the poison and kill them. And he's like, no poison. No, we've got to be friendly to the earth. And besides which, we also have cats, so therefore he didn't want to use anything inside the house that might make our little darlings sick. So what did I do? I also went to Google, and I had vaguely remembered somewhere reading something about that you can use baby powder to get rid of ants. And so I did. I went to Google, and I put in a search that said, getting rid of ants baby powder. And sure enough, I came up with an article right then and there. You know, 15, 20 years ago, I would have probably had to contact, if being new to Pasadena, I would have had to figure out, you know, where are the exterminators, what's a reliable one, perhaps ask my colleagues at work or go to the library and ask them if, you know, if they have any lists of people that I can contact, et cetera. But now, you know, all I did was go to Google, put it in, and this was just one of a whole bunch of articles. I actually found like over 7,000 articles. And if I hadn't put in the getting rid of ants baby powder, if I had just said, you know, ant control, I probably would have come up with millions of results instead of the much more limited, because I did use many more terms. State extension agents, good. You know, I didn't even think of looking on the Sierra Club website. I was just so freaked out. I was like, I want to get rid of them now. And I had baby powder, so I just ran upstairs to the bathroom, got the baby powder, and started sprinkling it around every crack that I could find. And I have to say that in our case, it worked. So there you go, baby powder. Who knew? And it has to be talcum.
Yeah, because it sticks on there, doesn't it? Stick on.
Yeah.
It makes it uncomfortable, dries them out. Good comment from Jerry that people might put something on Facebook, which you're crowdsourcing the question to all your friends who oftentimes have a good answer.
Oh, I like that. So this next slide is one of my all-time favorite slides that Stacy found. This is a futuristic windshield located in your car maybe 20, 30 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, and it basically is showing you possibilities of information that will be available to you as you drive down the street. Not only is it telling you how fast you're going, but it's also showing you where the nearest Starbucks is, and apparently it has, you will see one of the things is in red. It shows that the driver of that car has an expired registration and had a DUI conviction in 2012. And yes, distracted driving indeed. This person might be having a conference call at the same time. They have Google Maps up showing them where they are going, or perhaps, you know, something akin to not having to have a separate GPS instrument. It's embedded in your windshield. So this kind of information at your fingertips might be really ubiquitous at some point in the future.
And how do we as libraries think about how we fit in this new information world? If a driver can have information fed to them on various different topics, categories, where's the Starbucks, maps, is that something we have to start thinking about how that technology is going to work? Because would we push to people, hey, there's the author that you love is going to be at our library at 4 o'clock, and it's right at this branch that's near where you are already. So it's really looking at these. This is just the beginnings of, we're already starting to see, and we've been experiencing screens being filled up with more information. If you think about years ago when you'd watch TV, you would really actually just watch the movie that was being shown on a channel. Now you're not only watching the movie, but you're getting pop-ups of what's coming next. There might be a news flash that goes across the bottom of the screen. We're already being trained to look at information and starting to filter a lot of information in one place. So the next thing is this whole notion of everywhere, and thinking about how we can get information to we're starting to build information that's built into everything around us that is accessible through our mobile devices. So in this case, this is a future where you might see a dog on the street and your phone can interact with whatever he's tagged with and tell you that he's Bob and he's friendly and he belongs to Betty and here's her number, so if he's a lost dog. But also being able to interact with other types of information around you. What kind of tree is this? Tell me more about this historical building. If you think about the QR code tags, the quick read tags that are able to be produced so that when you take a picture with your phone, if you have the right software, you get more information about a particular service or device or thing. This whole notion of embedded technology even takes people into being even further able to find the information they need without intervention by somebody else. And so I'm just thinking about my iPhone. Many of you might already have an iPhone, but my iPhone, I have several applications on it that enable me to do things that I couldn't have done before. So the other day I was in the car with my husband and we couldn't remember if a song was the Kinks or the Stones, and I held up my Domi app to the radio. It captured the song and then told us it was a Kinks song and when it was produced and the name and title and then where I could download it off of iTunes immediately. So I didn't need interaction, which is kind of interesting because now you have kgb.com, which I know we're going to talk about in just a minute, talking about how our companies are trying to engage people through technology, but on a person-to-person basis. I didn't want to lose, there was a question earlier about Google and how do people know it's the right information or if it's credible information, and that's the big issue now. What is truth? What is truthiness? And how do we as libraries help to build in people's ability to build in and understand the information that they're viewing? Of course, there's going to be a lot of things out there. There's a lot of stuff that's around us that's not even digital, that's either true or not true. We see things on television. There are ads in magazines and books. There are books that are wrong. There are textbooks that are not credible. So it's really about us creating a nation of curiosity to say, is what I'm finding, is this a credible answer? And I think that's another role that we have to think about in libraries is how do we continue to encourage that. Did you want to say anything more about everywhere, Rosario?
No, I think I'll go on to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay. I think you're going to handle the introduction on this one, Stacy?
So I've done a lot of featuring work, and one of the first things that futurists do when they're talking with anybody about the future is we talk about assumptions, because there's power in assumptions. And a lot of times we don't share our assumptions. So we start off having conversations without even understanding each other's assumptions. And so I'm going to turn it back to Rosario for our question of the day.
Okay, our question of the day is reference already dead and we just haven't pulled the plug? Meaning, has it been on life support for the last several years and we just haven't said, okay, let's just let go of it? And one of the questions that I have, or one of the problems that I have with reference is the term itself, because Stacy and I were talking about this. The use of the term reference itself is something that it's a term that's very recognized within the library community, but outside of the library community, outside of the profession, it might not be as well known. And I think Stacy had the example that she heard of somebody who came up to the reference desk, and the person who came up to the reference desk was asking if this was where she could get a letter of reference.
Oh, I think this is from this group. Mary told us about it.
Oh.
One of your examples from this group. Yeah.
Yes, there's been some active discussion about signage, and we've had a good discussion in the discussion forums about signage used in the building itself, that it's not consistent even in the building itself, and definitely not consistent with what's on the website. So yes, that example came from one of the learners in this course.
So I'd like to ask the participants, how many of you think that reference is dead already and we just haven't pulled the plug? Would you raise your hands? And how do I, okay, and how many of you think that, I'm not seeing.
I'm not seeing the hands either.
Yeah. Mary, do you get to see the hands?
Where is the, there we go, I see a hand, a little slow to come. Mary's hand is up. Let me see if I've,
there we go.
Okay. How many of you think that reference will be dead in 5 years? Raise your hands, please. And how many of you think that reference will be dead in 10 years? Again, those of you who do, raise your hands. Somebody says, depends, in person or virtual. And somebody else says, it is not dead, just different than your grandma's reference. So it's not your, what was that commercial? This isn't your father's Oldsmobile, or was it Buick? Oh, my God, I can't even remember which ad it was. But, yes, it is a biased group. This is a biased group. Somebody says reference is undead, just like a zombie.
I'm into the zombie references. That's a good one.
Yeah. Oh, and okay.
And
so,
sorry. I was going to say, I think that, when we talk about reference, I think it is a little bit of everything, and a little bit of that. It's not reference. To me, reference has a very specific mental model for people, and it's one of the things that Rosario and I have talked a lot about, which is it really reference or is it information services? And when we think about information services, we have to think about it broadening to more than just people always coming to us, but us moving into different directions, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So the thing about assumptions that I want to make sure that you all continue to do is to really test your assumptions, because our assumptions drive our decisions, which drive our actions. So if there are some people in your organization that think that reference will never die, and then you have some people who think that reference is already dead, then what you have is two different conversations happening in the same space with no resolution of how we move forward and how we evolve. So it's really important to make our assumptions about the future and about different services and different products that libraries have, to make them explicit so we can have really good dialogue so that we can move forward and we can evolve. And it's also important because it'll help us clarify our mental models about the future. So if ever you're having these conversations with people, especially people who may not use libraries, it's good to ask them about their assumptions and pull out what is the underlying assumption that they have. And so when we think about the future and what do we need to maybe move from and need to think about in terms of information services, when we did the think tank and we had our builders group work through all the data, all the ideas, all the thoughts, it's a notion of this collector, finder, giver to a more information designer, collaborator, and packager. We know from the statistics that we have been that we took with the Zogby poll that people really want to find things on their own. And there are more and more companies that are creating all this packaged kind of information and designing information. So So information services is broader than somebody coming and asking us a question. It's how are we producing and helping people get to that information that we have. Rosario?
So it's a matter of us, instead of being collectors and just givers or just finders of information, into becoming information designers. How do we bring together what they need? How do we collaborate with the people looking for information and also with those who are putting out information? And how do we package that so that it fits the needs of the users? It fits the needs of the curiosity seekers. It fits the needs of those looking for that information, even though we may not be calling it reference. And you're right. I mean, whatever, as long as there are people looking for answers, we'll be doing reference no matter what we call it. But we need to be aware that that we need to really change our approach and the models that we use. And so this leads us then into the recommendations that we have put forth out of the think tank and out of all the feedback that we got. And there were several recommendations. First of all, one of the things that came out was that people really thought highly enough of the think tank activity to want to make it an ongoing activity, to keep that future thinking momentum going. By bringing together people, not a leadership institute, because that's different. We have a Eureka Leadership Institute here in California already, and it seems to be working fine. But rather to bringing together folks and letting them let loose of their inhibitions and basically envisioning, okay, 20 years from now, what's going to be happening with this service? Or, you know, what is technology going to allow us to do? Or how will we be able to revision what we're doing? Because thinking about the future is really different than being a leader. And that's why we really are seriously considering this, making separate from a leadership institute. This, I think, would show that we have an ongoing commitment to evolution and innovation, something that we think is very important in the library community.
And also creating pilot programs, pilot testing. And one of the things when we were talking about looking at information services and moving away from reference, people initially thought we were just going to take the models we have now and reorganize them. And the real issue is, why would we reorganize ourselves when we're not even sure what the services are that we're going to provide? So the whole notion of committing to evolution and piloting things to see how they work. And as we begin to do different services, what we'll start to see is our energy going in different directions and other things moving along, and maybe we let go of some things because we see that our energy needs to go in a different direction.
And I see a comment from Sharon Claremont. It says, these ideas are not new for corporate and news libraries. And I think that's very true. In the corporate community, you have had to really reinvent yourself at a very fast rate in order to stay relevant. And that's something that we've not been forced to do in the public library community and maybe not even in the academic library community. And it's something that we really need to buckle down and do, because with the economic situation now, relevancy becomes even more important. Why should we continue to get money? I don't know if anybody of you saw that there was an American Libraries Direct. There was a little blurb in American Libraries Direct yesterday about this library in, I think it's Oak Brook, Illinois, in which this gentleman says, why should we even have a public library? We don't need one. And I thought, oh, now's the time for the community to basically say, this is why we need a public library, and this is why we need to continue supporting it with public funds. His attitude was, I don't think any public funds should be used for a public library, which I thought was an interesting argument. But our recommendation number 2 was for us to develop an information test or game, or test and game, the objective being that we want to encourage learning and playing at the same time. The idea is to make it web-based, and I have to say that this particular recommendation probably had the most people volunteering to work on it. Everybody was like, oh, I want to do that. Provide libraries with a question of the day, give them options and different games that they could incorporate onto their websites. The idea is to have people to make it attractive and interesting enough and seek out those who are curious enough to keep coming back to the website and checking to see what is it. Why do we go to certain websites? Because they keep changing the information that is on there. So something like this, I think, would be really interesting. And like I said, it's got a lot of people volunteering.
And it's really, it's also designed to make people aware of the resources that are available. So we see this as being something that could be related to what Jerry was saying about helping patrons become more information competent, technology competent, technological competencies, in that creating something where people are being asked to find information in places that maybe they would have never gone before. It could be a database. They could be learning about unique collections that are available around the state. It's about looking at the way people are engaging with the world around them, and we know that gaming is one of them. And this is an alternative. We could do an alternative reality type of game where some of it might be online, some of it might be in the actual libraries, and then it could also be customized so that people could learn more about what resources are there. And we also had this idea of sort of what is your information IQ? Do you know where all the resources are for the information that you're looking for? And in a fun way, I don't know how many of you are on Facebook and people send you the which character in Alice in Wonderland would you be, or would you survive a zombie attack, which it took me 3 times to be able to survive a zombie attack. But it creates curiosity and engages people in a different way. And this is, I think, a good way to engage people with what we have, but also to interest them in even more things.
So the next recommendation was, in order to take advantage of the power of the group think, you know, the big thing now is cloud computing, open source, moving everything so that you're not totally dependent on one provider, et cetera, is to maybe create a mobile applications warehouse, to basically create an online warehouse of mobile device applications that would make it easier to connect users with libraries and information. And this would be applications that are developed by libraries throughout the state, throughout the country, and bring them into a single location, and you would know where to go to look for them. Kind of like an iTunes store, but for libraries, where they wouldn't have to say, okay, I need to go here for this application, but I need to go to this other location for this other application. Question, do libraries have the resources, expertise, personnel to create mobile apps? That's a good question, and I would say that the people who are, that a lot of applications, a lot of the mobile device apps are created by people who have a real interest in seeing that application. So it could be that somebody wants to be able to connect to a certain location, or think of what District of Columbia Public Libraries did. They created an application for, correct me if I'm wrong, for the iPhone, wasn't it, Stacey?
Yes, it was,
for their
Rosario. It was their tech lab at DCPL created an iPhone application. This is Mary jumping in. We actually had that in one of the things we looked at in the course as well.
But I think that there's enough interest out there, and to encourage the community to develop these apps. And I think that if we take advantage of the power of the whole, then we will be able to do this.
And I think, too, it's looking at, sometimes we just need to know what we want. We have to have enough experience with playing with these kinds of things and looking in our communities to see how many people are using these devices and what kinds of apps they're using. And then we need to look at our collections and we need to say, how can we make this more accessible in an interesting way? And what would that look like? So I'm thinking about the State Library, and we have amazing collections of photographs of downtown Sacramento from all times in history. If we could have an app that when you're walking down the street that you could click on it and it might show you a picture of what that street looked like during different years, and you could look at different years holding your phone up to a street. That might be one app. How can we take the information that we have and make it accessible to people in ways that are interesting and packaged? Again, moving away from the mass search to the packaging of information. And I think in terms of when we're talking about skills, do we have the skills? Many of us don't have the skills, but we have the ideas. So then we have to find the right people, and that's where crowdsourcing comes in. There are a lot of geeks, and geek is like a cool word right now, apparently. I was in my Southwest magazine as I was flying yesterday. Geek is cool. There are people out there that would be happy to sit down and volunteer their time to create something. It's just finding these people and having the ideas ready to go to have conversation about what is it that we could create and make available not only to our users but to the whole library community as a whole. And then how do we create, I'm even thinking about institutes for librarians, because I think we need to, over the long run, it would be good for us to start developing these skills. Because the more we have to rely on others to wait to create stuff, it really puts us behind, and it puts us in a disadvantage. And you see that with our ILS systems and with databases. We're relying on other people, and we need to start developing these skills.
So for some reason, recommendation number 5 got ahead of recommendation number 4 because it was anxious to get out of here or on the screen. But recommendation number 5 was to identify dark data in the dark collections. Like Stacy was just saying, you know, the State Library has all these wonderful photos, but how do we get them out to the people at the point of curiosity? So identifying the data in collections and making connections between the collections, partnering with different cultural institutions, and providing multiple nodes of access, not just geographic but thematic, et cetera. And this, we know, is going to take time to develop and probably fiscal resources. But we need to do it because otherwise we continue to have collections that are in silos. And as long as those collections are in silos, then you might as well lock the door and throw the key away because they're only available to a very few people.
And thinking about how do we broaden our borders. So again, it's the silos. In the state of California in 4th grade, kids have to do the missions. Well, how many libraries have unique collections that might be buried in unique databases that they've created that may have images or text or other kinds of media? Wouldn't it be great if a 4th grader could easily navigate between all the resources that are available in the state of California among libraries rather than having to figure out which places have the information that they need?
And now recommendation number 4, waiting patiently in the wings. And that is to maybe start to develop or start to seriously work with some kind of video service or a Skype-like service to use voice over IP to help the users get hold of us. And I know that I've seen some messages on some group lists that we maintain here at SCLC, basically asking about Skype, and all sorts of alarm bells went off among people saying, you know, but what about security, or you know, our IT people are really concerned about security. And my thought was, if I want to ask a librarian a question, and I want to be able, and I can get hold of them over Skype or some kind of VoIP service, you know, why should all of a sudden I start worrying about how secure the connection is? I'm not giving them my Social Security number. I'm not giving them my bank account number. At least I hope I'm not. Sometimes I think we put barriers up for ourselves instead of trying to think, okay, how can we work within the with what's available and start to test it out. And then if we run into problems, let's look at those problems. And thinking about concentric circles, how can we use these services to then collaborate with other libraries? Stacey, you have anything to say about this one?
Yeah, and I think it's also looking at more video, and I think we're going to see more video embedded in the way we're communicating with each other. I know the iPhone, Apple has a new patent on a phone that has a camera on the front so that you could do more video kinds of interactions with people. And so again, some of these recommendations come out of we need to start playing to prepare ourselves for what's coming. It's building foundations for the things that are coming in terms of what people's expectations will be in terms of how they can connect with us. And it could be as simple as we use Skype to go from branch to branch because we have experts in different branches in libraries, or we have partnerships with other libraries where we can connect people so they can have a conversation with somebody, an expert in a particular area. So it's just really looking at how do we prepare ourselves for changes that are coming, and we're starting to see the beginnings of it now with all of the different video services that are appearing.
So having gone through the recommendations, the question now back to you guys is, what is your future, or your vision of the future? What do you see as, where do you see these services going in the next 10, 20 years?
That's a very good question, Rosario. This week in the course they've been asked to think about their own library and where their own information reference services are going in the immediate future. They were asked to do a reference revision, but it's just in the immediate future. So this is bigger picture. This is much more future-oriented.
Mm-hmm. And part of this, too, is sometimes we have to challenge our assumptions about the future because our assumptions often are based on the past and the models that we've seen in the past without releasing some things that change. So, for instance, a friend of mine has a postcard, and on that postcard it's the home of the future, and it's from the 50s, and it's a woman in her dress and high heels and apron, and she's hosing down her living room because the future is plastic, and it's so easy to clean your house now because you can just hose it down and there's a drain in the middle of the floor. And this is the future that they were seeing in the 50s. But when you look at the postcard, the postcard's not showing that there's a change in society. The woman is still sort of the household from the way she's dressed. Of course, all of us dress in high heels when we clean our houses, but she's dressed as that 50s housewife, and that's what it was going to be in the year 2000 from the 1950s. And so we have to think about what changes might occur that enable people to do things that we don't think they can do now because they might not be accessible to people because of cost. And absolutely, the cost of things drop very fast. And we have to look at those things and think, well, we can't assume that not everybody's going to have something. We can't make assumptions. So what we have to do is we have to sort of play with scenarios. And we say, well, if 20 years from now, everything that we use is no longer PC but Surface and touch, what does that look like in a library? And how do people move things from one thing to another? And what kinds of devices do people carry? And how does that work in a library? How do we give people information? How do we collaborate with people in these new environments? And then there's that environment which says the world is equal and more people have access. And then you might say, well, what if people didn't have access? Where are their roles? Where are their places that we can fill? What are our concerns? But I find that in libraries, we often always assume that no, people will not have access to that. There will always be poor. There will always be, yes, there will always be people who are in some sort of need, but that's the role of the libraries to help bring those folks up. So when you're thinking about the future and the types of ways that people are accessing information and finding information, what kinds of things they need and where they're learning, we're just a key. We're just a piece of a whole system. And we have to continue to look at, in our communities, where do we fit in? A couple of really good comments. Power supply is a really interesting issue. I don't know if any of you have seen the commercial from Best Buy now, the new device that you can buy and plug in. It's like a mat, and you just stick, there's another device you stick on your phone or whatever, and then you can just throw it on the mat. You don't have to plug in anything anymore.
I saw that, and I wondered.
I want one.
I wonder how well it works.
I know. I'm so tired of wiring and cable. But when we think about information services and more people trying to find things for themselves, then we have to start thinking about then how are we changing to accommodate the needs and how people are finding those things. And how are we making sure that what we have is accessible and easy to use And how are we pushing for changes in the standards? If you think about, Google taught us to be able to cast the net to the whole world and to be able to hunt and peck and through serendipity find information. And when you come to a library website, in most cases you have to figure out which pond to fish in. So it's not like I can cast a whole net and find all the articles and all the books and all the things that the library might have in a certain category. I have to actually go and hunt and peck. And there are things like web feet, but they're still not quite there yet. Still not quite what we need. And so how do we become information designers? And that's a key point.
You've done such a good job, Stacy and Rosario, of picking up questions and comments from the chat window. I really have to compliment your ability to be aware of the questions coming in at the same time. That's been terrific. There was one question that came in kind of early on, or a comment about this. If you remember the letter you first showed on the screen from Marcos about the holographic librarian,
Yes.
and we had one person who made a comment about that holographic librarian always being ubiquitous. Whenever there's an information need, there's the holographic librarian. But it does make me wonder, because we had Marie Radford as a guest presenter in the second week of the course, and Marie talked about the importance of the interpersonal relationship between the reference provider and the patron. And how do you think those kinds of interpersonal relationships will develop when there are these ubiquitous holographic librarians?
It's an interesting comment.
Yeah, and it depends, too, what this holographic librarian is. Is this somebody that's being projected from another place, or is this artificial intelligence? And it's projected in a way that is more familiar and comforting to us in whatever character or format we find comforting. And artificial intelligence, I don't think we'll see really good artificial AI for another 20 years. At least that's what I've heard from the scientists who are playing with it right now, because there are context issues with AI, artificial intelligence, knowing the differences between certain words that mean two completely different things. So I think, those relationships, do people want to make relationships with us for information? In some cases, yes. And is that sort of a medium role for us where we start to really build bonds with people? And in your community, and in some communities, it's done informally anyways, that Jill becomes my favorite librarian and she's my information guru, or Joan is my guru, or Susan or Mary, and I make these relationships. In larger systems, sometimes that doesn't necessarily happen unless you have like a power user who's using you all the time. But if you think about what are those relationships that people are going to want or need in relationship to what it is that they need? And what was really interesting when we did the Zogby poll is we asked people, if you can't find the information you're looking for, how would you want to communicate with a librarian? And across the board, even among all age groups, they said in person. Wasn't that right, Rosario?
Yes. Yes, they did. And that Zogby poll, by the way, for those of you who have not seen the final report, it is available on the State Library's website. I never can remember the URL for it, but if you go to the State Library's website and just do a search in the search box on the Zogby, Z-O-G-B-Y, it's the first PDF link that pops up, I believe.
Yes, and we actually included the PDF report in the course supplementary reading too, Rosario, because I knew they'd be really interested to see that. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and I don't want to close off the discussion, so we'll stay online for about 5 minutes more, but I do want to thank those who are attending who have to leave us at the top of the hour because of desk shifts or other schedules. We do schedule these for exactly an hour.
And I did just put our contact information up there.
Great, thank you. And for those who are leaving now, thank you so much for joining us today. A big thank you to Rosario and Stacy for making time out of your busy schedules to do this. This was just exactly what we needed towards the end of this course as we're doing our revisioning, but you've given us a bigger vision for the future of connected information services. So we'll say goodbye to those who have to leave right now. We will stay online a little bit longer to answer any additional questions or to take additional comments as well. Were there any others that you saw, Rosario and Stacy, in the chat window? I lost my connection, so I did lose a portion of the chat. Any other comments or questions that you saw that still need to be addressed?
I didn't see any others that still need to be addressed, but I would like to just say for those who are still on, one comment about the holographic and in-person. The advances in video conferencing are such now that you're able to get a video conferencing service that makes it appear like you are in the room with the other participants. I saw a demonstration of Cisco's telepresence, and my jaw just dropped. I mean, talk about a severe case of technolust. I was like, if I had $200,000, I would buy this right now. It is expensive for the top end of that, but I think that those kinds of developments are such that I think the price point is going to start dropping rather rapidly, and the idea that you have to walk in to a library to get good service is, if you have good video conferencing, I think that would, if I have a webcam and I'm able to connect with a librarian from my office or from home, and I do have a webcam already built into my new laptop, that would make it great. Why do I have to fight traffic to be able to talk to somebody, quote, face-to-face?
There's this interesting trend I was reading about in China where there are people who you can pay to get in your car when you're in an unfamiliar place, and they act like a personal GPS system. So they're not using technology, they're using people. And is there a role right now for librarians to kind of start that, what Sharon was saying earlier about a personal librarian? Could we start testing, what does that look like? How does that work? How does it work? And does the librarian have to be somebody who's in your backyard, or could it be somebody from far away? Or is it your kind of info group of people that you start to collect, of really smart people who have access to things, so you can outsource your searching for information and ideas? So I think it'd be kind of interesting.
Oh, and I'm just seeing a question. Yes, from Heather. We will be putting the slides online as well as the recorded archive of this presentation. We've been doing that for all of the webinars. And we'll set up this one will be a good one, I think, Stacy and Rosario, because you've raised so many interesting points about the future of library service, library information service. After the webinar is completed and we've done the recording, we put the recorded archive and the PowerPoint slides into the course site, and then we set up a discussion forum for people to continue to discuss and ask questions about this. So this will be a lively one, I think.
Great.
I certainly enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us,
you.
Mary.
Thank you. I mean,
thank you, Rosario.